Welcome to Riding Mower King. In this video, we're going to be looking at this Craftsman snowblower. This has been sitting here since late winter. I started working on it, and it doesn't want to start. It'll crank over, but the carburetor needs to come off. And on this one here, this style engine, you're going to see why it's such a project to get this carburetor off. So after I did the carburetor, that's when I found out there was also no spark, which brings us to video number 2. Okay, so now I got a replacement coil. I ordered 2 of them from Amazon. These were cheap. They were like $12 on sale. It looks like the same kind, so we're going to find out. And I tried to see what I could find online about troubleshooting this coil, and I could literally find almost no information on the whole engine. Plenty of diagrams. If you wanted to order parts, there's plenty of ways to order the parts, but there's virtually no information except for it's basically like a Honda clone made in China for MTD, and there's like no specs. There's no name or type of engine almost. Well, there is a type of engine. It's I'll put it up on the screen, the model of the engine, but otherwise there's no information on it. So here's a photograph of the model number on this engine. It's on an area underneath the starter, down below the starter. And when you look this up, the 365 SUB, I got one listing for parts tree that said it's a Troy build engine 2009 and before. Now the label on the back of the snowblower for Craftsman, when you look up that model number for the mower, it lists the engine as a 365-SUA, and the same parts tree website says that's an MTD engine, which, everybody knows that Troy build is MTD. It's just a name, so they list that differently. So if you look up the model number on the side of the engine, it could possibly be a little confusing. Both drawings look the same, so it really doesn't matter. But otherwise, there really was not any information about this engine. It doesn't even seem to be a Powermore engine. It's just a straight up MTD, no name, possibly a Honda clone. So now that I have supposedly a new coil here, I'm just going to test it to see what kind of readings we get. And going from the high tension lead to ground to the body is the only measurement that you get that's not zero. You test any of these wires, and there's zero resistance to the body here. So this measures 12.6, and if I go with the one on the engine here, the same measurement from the high tension lead over to the body, we get 10.2. So that's a couple ohms difference. Maybe that makes all the difference. Maybe that's why we don't have any spark. So we're going to attempt to mount this new one and see what we end up with. Now, there was one common thing when I read reviews. Some people said that it fit no problem. It worked great, got them going. But there was a pretty good number of people that said that the mounting holes did not quite line up, and they had to make the holes a little bit bigger. So it depends on what size engine you're putting this on. I believe this engine's a 179 cc's, and it's also listed as fitting the 208. I think it's the 208 size, and maybe one more. So that size, the block may change depending on the size of the engine, and the spacing may change, or there may have been a running change in production where they changed the spacing for the holes. So we're going to see what happens here. Well, luckily they all fit through there. If you have the carburetor out of the way, then it'd be a little bit easier. So I still have to fix this wire here. Well, from what I can tell, the spacing is the same. So maybe I'll get lucky there. And that's the lead that is made for turning it off by putting the throttle down all the way. So now we got the coil on there facing in the correct direction. Get our 10,000th feeler gauge out here. Crank the magnet up here. Let the magnet hold it tight. All right, I'm happy with that gap. Now I'll put the spark plug in. See what we get. And we're all plugged in. Well, we're sparking now. So now we should be at the point where it will run. Well, at this point, we can put it all back together, and I can use the rope, and then we can take the starter off later. So I think I'm going to try that because I want to hear this run. So right now, we're going to reuse this spark plug for now. Well, as much as I want to get this done, I really need to connect this wire to the kill switch, so it shuts off when you put the throttle down all the way. We're going to attempt to take this screw out here. And maybe I won't lose anything. Well, yeah, that ain't going to work. So the nut that goes on the end of this screw is laying underneath there with the end of the wire. So this is the nut that goes under there. But there should be a connector for the wire. Well, it looks like if we take off that screw there, we can get this whole assembly out, which is what it's going to take. And I really want to connect that wire back up so that it turns off when you put the throttle down. Well, right now I've got a lot of screws out of this thing laying on the table over here. I'm going to have fun figuring out where they all go. This was not supposed to be a long project. But so far, at least, it seems like replacing the coil got us spark. So we're at least going in the right direction. Which I totally expected to have spark after replacing the coil, but I also expected it to start when I put the carburetor back on. So now, somewhere down there is the end of that wire that went on here with this nut and this terminal right here. So this is how this was in here. Just like that. So somewhere on the other side of this wire here, right there, is where this was connected. And I would imagine that there was a loop on the end of this, a terminal, that went on there like that. And this one here is isolated from touching here. This is a plastic block, most likely plastic. Then we have a plastic washer right here. So there should be no continuity between here and ground. I should be able to put my meter on here and have no continuity. And then when you put the throttle down all the way, then you would short out the coil and make the engine shut off. Because this would go against there and complete the circuit to ground. So we're going to test this out here. So now we're touching just that terminal. Just that little tang there, we're touching that. Ooh, there we go. So we're touching just that. We've got continuity there. We have no continuity there. We should have continuity here. See, so this is isolated from there right now. You know, that screw it's connected to that screw on the back here. But that screw has this plastic washer, so it's not touching there. But when you put the throttle down, now you got continuity from the screw to here. And that's going to cut your spark out. So that's why it shuts off when you put the throttle down all the way. And that's a fairly common practice on small engines like this. You know, there's a lot of other things that are like that. All the other snowblowers have pretty much that same setup. So I just need to connect the wire to this to plug in to this little wire over here, the short one over there. That needs to go onto that terminal. Okay, so we got our wire connected here. Got a new ring terminal on there and an extension. So we're ready to put this back in. And yes, in the interest of only doing that wire one time, it is a little bit longer than what's needed, but a little bit longer is not going to hurt anything. All right, I'm going to put another screw in over here to hold this in place. It has some spring tension on it. And I believe the gas tank is part of this. I'll tighten this one. And now we have the throttle control all bolted back in. So we're going to check the switch to make sure it's working the right way. And we'll check this wire just to make sure that it's not touching anything it's not supposed to touch. Otherwise, we won't have any spark. So this is the one coming from the switch. That's supposed to only have ground when the throttle's all the way closed. So we put the throttle down here, and we got continuity. So this kill wire is working. Well, I have a good connection here, like that. So we're good to go there. Now, perhaps I made this wire a little bit long, but I'm okay with that. I'm going to tuck it in there. Oh, I see a problem. I ran the spring over top of the wire. Under the wire is supposed to be over top. So that's not going to work. That's eventually going to cause a problem. Let's get this spring off of here. Oh, yeah, that I put the... Now we're going to run the wire with the other wires. So we're going to have to get this spring out of here. Now what's going on here? You want to make sure that there's no wires rubbing against that throttle spring. Otherwise, it's not going to respond right. There we go. All right, so we've got our throttle movement with no interference from the wires. As long as they stay where they're supposed to. Plug our spark plug wire in there. Now at this point, you want to make sure that you have your wires tucked down in there so they're not going to come out and get in the way of that throttle movement at all. So what's next? So before the gas tank goes on, this has to go on. Behind the spring. That's going to cover all these wires here. We're going to get those down. This is not a friendly engine to work on by any means. But all these wires still have to go under here. This cover needs to come over yet. Maybe a ½ an inch. Why does it not want to? What am I missing here? The bottom needs to go on the other side of the drain tube. So down here you have your drain tube, and the cover has to go on this side of it. There's a cutout on the bottom of the cover. You have to slide that over the drain tube. So now we have our cover right about where we need it. And we can start putting screws in it. All right, we got that one started. And then we put this screw in over here. This is going to keep that throttle covered up so it doesn't get anything in there to keep it from operating the right way. Now let's put some of these screws back in. Somebody at this factory really loves thin metal brackets and a lot of screws. They must have stock in a hardware company or a fastener factory or something like that. All right, I think we're ready for the gas tank again. While we're over here, I'm going to take the starter off, see if we can make it work better. All right, so we finally got this off. I don't see anything to keep it from working the right way. Kicks out right away. It goes out like it's supposed to. Must be a snug fit. I had to pull on it to get it off. Let's see if it goes back on. Now we got an extra wire hanging out here that I didn't even see. This is going to be for a headlight. Accessory power. Red circuit heated grips. Yellow circuit headlight. All right. So it's there. You got the availability. But if you would have had to spend more on the next model up to get the headlight or the heated grips. But apparently the windings are in there to put the power out. Well, let's hit the button again. Well, it cranks it every time at least. So if I put the choke on, this thing should start up. Or not. Well, I guess I'd have to bolt the carburetor on all the way. So we'll go ahead and do that. Then it should start up. Well, it would have been something if it started without the carburetor bolted on. Would have had a pretty good vacuum leak. Ooh, we're almost out of battery on that one. How much battery we got left on this one? 3%. Well, I guess we're done for the day. Okay, we're back again on this snowblower. This is, I believe this is the third day of working on this. The first day I took it apart, found out there was no spark, and cleaned the carburetor. And the next day I put the coil on it, and that turned into a fairly long process to get it back together to where you see it now. And Actually, my batteries died before I was able to get it back together and started, but I didn't want to wait. So I actually already started this snowblower up, and it ran pretty good. So I already know it runs. I'm going to finish putting the parts back on the engine, and then we'll get it started up, and we'll look at the belts. And I think I'm going to have to adjust the belt for the auger. So let's get started putting the rest of these parts on. Now we got the heat shield. It fits on just a certain way. We're going to have to figure out what that is. So this simple metal heat shield has 6 screws that hold it on. That's just crazy. That's at least 3 too many. Well, we're going to go with these 2 down here. That leaves us these 4 that go into brass inserts. Looks like you'd be better off putting this on before the gas tank, because now the gas tank's in the way over here. Not impossible, but would be easier if you put the heat shield on first. So you might want to make a note of that. Put the heat shield on first. We got sheet metal and plastic, and the plastic warps, and the sheet metal sometimes bends, although this guard's in perfect shape. It's the plastic here that's not so good. So now, for reasons like this cover here, this took 6 screws to hold this cover on. So you're going to really want to plan ahead if you get this far into something like this. You want to lay your screws out in an organized fashion, which I didn't really do that. And it would have been a good idea, because in the end, this was like a 3-day project that actually took longer than that till I got the part that I needed to get spark again. So it would really pay to be organized right from the beginning with laying out your screws. Now we finally get to put the recoil start on. 3 little screws for this. Oh, I'm slowly running out of screws here. So self-tapping screws are for the belt cover. I mistakenly put them in the heat shield, which means I'm missing a screw yet. Or the screw just wasn't there. Now we'll finish putting all the screws back in the engine covers except for the belt cover. So we should only end up with 2 screws, the self-tapping screws, to go in the belt cover. And then finally we come back over to this side to put the electric starter button back on. These 2 holes here for the electric start, for the button. So we just have to get that lined up, the plastic cover, so we can put this screw in. Feels like it started. So there, after hours of working on this, I finally got it to where the engine's all back together. Carburetor cleaned, brand new coil put on it, spark plug cleaned. So we're going to set the choke here, got the gas up at a good spot. Hit the primer a little bit. So there it is with the choke all the way open. Well, I put the throttle all the way down and it cut the spark just like it's supposed to do. So let's we're going to start this back up. We're going to look at this belt here, because I noticed yesterday that the belt needs to be adjusted. So there you can see the belt jumping a little bit. So we're going to tighten that belt a little bit, because I don't like the way it's going around that pulley. So I'm holding the handle for this auger. And I can move this belt a little bit. And when it was running, it was kind of flopping a little bit there. So we're going to tighten that up a little. That way we don't have to worry about the auger slowing down when we hit the snow. Most of the time, there's a little bit of adjustment. You can move this over a little bit. I think it's really in case there's any variation in the belt that you put on. But we're going to move it over a little. Now you may have to take it apart, put it in a... Usually these are slotted, and I can see that it's slotted, but it doesn't want to slide over there. So it may be that it's like 2 or 3 holes. So we'll see about just moving that over. Yeah, this one's actually 2 holes. It's not slotted. Sometimes they're slotted. Of course, this one's going to be disagreeable, but we're still going to win. Problem here is that the belt got in the wrong spot. There we go. So there, now we're on the other side of the slot. Usually it's just a slot, but this is actually two holes that are semi-connected. So now there's one thing you want to watch. One thing you want to watch for when you're doing this is that the belt's not too tight. So we're going to tighten this up, and we're going to look at the slack in the belt when it's not engaged, because you don't want the belt to be too tight. There's our pulley. No drag on that. So that's going to be pretty good. The belt's still plenty loose. And right about there, the belt gets tight, and I still have a little bit more handle to go. See, there the belt's fairly tight. And if you can see the spring, there's still a little bit more stretch. So we actually have spring tension on the belt now. That's definitely better. So now we don't need to worry about the belt not being tight enough. Now we can get this belt cover back on here. Well, we can try to get the belt cover back on here. Sometimes you don't have a whole lot of space to work with. There we go. Here we'll look at the blower housing a little bit for overall condition. So down here on these skids, I didn't see any cracking on this housing. The corners were bent in pretty good. They would have actually hit the auger, but that could just be from abuse when moving it around. And the same thing over here. And the same thing on this side. This one was bent in. It looks like there's a couple of holes where you could put the shoes. There's a hole up here in the front also. Or maybe you could put bigger universal shoes on. These shoes actually look universal. I may adjust this one down a little bit. It's up a little high. But this part up here looks pretty good. In the housing here, it looks pretty good. We have good contact on our scraper bar back there. And on this one, each auger has its own individual shear pin. There's one for each individual piece. And doesn't look like there's any damage on there. And the impeller inside looks really, really good. And when it was running, there was no noise. And the model of this snowblower, the model year for this snowblower should be about a 2008. So right now it's 16 years old, but it looks fairly modern. Has good tires, and surprisingly, these tires have been holding air all summer. So there's one other thing we're going to look at. I'm going to put a picture of the data plate up on the screen. And the coil that I ordered actually bolted right on. So if your model number is like this one for the engine, it should fit. So now one other thing we're going to look at here, we're going to tighten up. And I think they could have designed it better. Is this handle's loose. And it's only got one bolt holding it. There's no hole here for the second one. There's a hole on the outside. There's a hole here, but there's no through hole. So this bolt here has to get tightened up more. And there may be a brass nut inside that thumb nut. that thumb screw there. But this is plastic, and there should be a nut insert, which means you're only going to be able to make this so tight. And then you have to hold that so it doesn't turn. Because you want this to be at the right angle so you can turn this easily. So we're going to turn that a little bit. A little bit more. Yeah, that's about as good as we're going to get there. So while we're holding this, we're going to tighten this a little bit more yet. It's actually already starting to split open right there. So that's just an example, another example of how these are under-engineered. They make them hard to work on, but they don't make them to hold up. And then this one over here is just a regular bolt. So we're going to be able to just tighten this one up some more. So now our handle's nice and tight for a while. It would be a good idea if you have trouble with this handle coming loose, put something around here, even if it's just a hose clamp, like the older style worm screw hose clamps, put on there, or some kind of shaft collar, or some kind of a U-bolt clamp, because you don't want to get this fatigued, because then, you know, you'll get a crack here, then you have to get the handle welded. Luckily, the screws down here at the bottom, a lot of time these screws come loose, but on this one, they're not. They haven't come loose yet. But that's my video on this snowblower. And we'll demonstrate the electric start. I lubed it up a little bit, so now it engages right away. It doesn't grind. There you can see right away it engages. So finally, this snowblower is ready to go after a few hours of work on it, dealing with the carburetor and the no spark condition. That set me back a couple days how to order a coil. I went with a cheap one, took the gamble. You know, if it wasn't going to work, it was only me. It's not like I need to charge a customer extra because right now it's my snowblower, but it's going to be on the market. So for you guys that work on these on the side, if you haven't run into this kind of engine yet, they're not fun to work on. They're not a challenge, but there's a lot of pieces to take apart just to get to something. And, you know, this was a no start and the carburetor was dirty, and, you know, you put it back together. That's when you find out you have no spark. So it would be a good idea to make sure you have spark before you even take it apart. Even if it is a carburetor, you want to know that you have spark, because that's a whole nother project on this one. So, you know, like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next video. It's going to be another snowblower video, I'm sure, because that's the season that we're in.